Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our new series, Beyond Jung, Living Synchronicity. I'd just like to introduce you now to the curator and chair of this event, Roderick Main. Roderick holds a BA and an MA in Classics from University of Oxford and a PhD in Religious Studies from Lancaster University. He now works at the University of Essex, where he is a professor in the Department of Psychosocial and Psychoanalytic Studies and director of the Center for Myth Studies. His books include Jung on Synchronicity and the Paranormal, The Rupture of Time, Synchronicity and Jung's Critique of Modern Western Culture, Revelations of Chance, Synchronicity as a Spiritual Experience, and most recently, Breaking the Spell of Disenchantment, Mystery, Meaning, and Metaphysics in the work of C.J. Jung. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Roderick. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, and thank you for inviting me to sort of curate and chair the sessions in this new series. So I'll just briefly introduce the series, and then I'll introduce today's speaker. So the series is sort of the inaugural set of talks in a new Beyond Jung series, which sort of honouring the work of Carl Gustav Jung, and I decided to focus in this series on synchronicity, and titled the series Living Synchronicity, to refer both to the vital contemporary importance of synchronicity and the possibility of our living more synchronistically. And I thought it was particularly relevant to begin with this topic, since the founder of the Paris Centre, the late David Peat, wrote a couple of very significant books on the topic. So synchronistic experiences, or meaningful coincidences as they're also known, are often described as profoundly significant, both personally and sometimes also at more than personal level. Synchronicity as a principle, to explain those experiences, a principle of acausal connection through meaning, is often claimed to have radical implications for how we understand reality. Jung himself associated synchronicity with a unitary worldview, and he developed the concept as a form of holistic epistemology to address what he saw as the perilous one-sidedness of modern experimental science when it gets separated from the realms of meaning and value. So in this series, we've gathered six sort of people who've been exploring the topic of synchronicity, each for, I think, over 3 decades, many more longer than that in some cases, from a variety of different perspectives. And they're each going to share some of their insights into the nature and importance of synchronicity and how it has played into their personal and professional lives. So that's the series, and today's speaker, it's a very great pleasure to introduce Professor Rick Tarnas. He's an emeritus professor at the California Institute of Integral Studies, where he founded the graduate program in philosophy, cosmology, and consciousness. He himself was educated at Harvard University, and he spent many years working at the Esalen Institute as well, where he was for many years the director of programs and education. He's written some absolutely fantastic books, of which I shall highlight the two ones that probably are unknown to some of you. The first is the Passion of the Western World, a sort of a very significant overview of the history of the development of intellectual thought from the Greeks to the postmodern period in Western culture. Really tremendously clear and informative book. And then Cosmos and Psyche, an even more substantial volume, which is subtitled "Intimations of a New Worldview," and here Rick sets out his understanding and exploration of what he calls archetypal psychology. Both of those books are really, superbly written, beautifully written, profound in their insights, and saturated with wisdom. And if you haven't read them, I encourage you to do so. And if you have read them, I encourage you to read them again. So I was also privileged to get to know Rick a little bit, because we were part of a sort of a synchronicity research group that was operating recently, and we jointly contributed to a book which I'll also give a little plug for, because we've both got essays in it, called The Playful Universe: Synchronicity and the Nature of Consciousness, published by I think it's the the Association for the Advancement of Post-Materialist Science and the Galileo Commission and Scientific and Medical Network, I think. Anyway, if you search around on the web, you'll find that, The Playful Universe. Anyway, so Rick in his work has made some of the sort of most helpful and clear and sort of deeply thought through introductions and insights into synchronicity that I've encountered. He sets the topic in a very broad context. So I think it's particularly appropriate to begin this series with him as the first speaker. With that, I'm going to hand over to you, Rick, and thank you for accepting the invitation to speak here. And I'm greatly looking forward to what you might say today. And I understand you'll speak for maybe an hour or an hour and a quarter or something like this. Yeah.
That's right. And then open up to dialogue and discussion with everybody to receive your insights, everybody else's insights, and comments and queries. So, well, thank you very much for your warm introduction. Roderick, as somebody whose work in the area of synchronicity I have admired for many years. I've taught graduate seminars, 15-week courses on synchronicity, and Roderick's work is one of the key texts, as those of you who have studied synchronicity in any scholarly depth will be aware of Roderick's work. So I was quite honored to have him invite me to initiate this important series. And I'd also like to thank Eleanor for her organizing of everything that you do, Eleanor, at the Paris Center, and also for this gathering, this series of presentations in particular. I know a lot goes into both the kinds of things that Roderick has done and the kinds of things that Eleanor has done to create such an event. There's a lot that happens behind the scenes, a lot of details, a lot of care, and we owe you both a great debt. So I'll just jump right in here and begin to set out some of my kind of major reflections just on the phenomenon of synchronicity, just as a way of getting an overview and situate this subject and the phenomenon in a larger historical, even evolutionary context, and also look at some of the major ways in which synchronicities are lived, because after all, it's the phenomenology of synchronicity that's so important. It's how we experience them. It's how what is their influence on our lives. How do we, whatever our philosophical framework by which we engage the mystery of synchronicity, and I think we in the end have to acknowledge that it's a mystery. It's something that while human understanding gives us remarkable insights, into the phenomenon of synchronicity, or you could say the cosmos gives the human mind remarkable insights into the deeper nature of synchronicity. It's I believe it's an inexhaustible mystery, and in that sense, it requires a certain epistemological modesty on our part as we explore it and discuss it and have our formulations and so forth. I do believe that Jung's concept of synchronicity really represents one of the most successful efforts of the 20th century to create a bridge across the chasm between the inner and the outer, between self and world, between psyche and cosmos. The concept's been widely embraced in popular culture in the last 30 years in particular, with synchronicities also just playing a major role in the way many people make sense of their lives. It's as we emerge from the late modern period and modern worldview and enter into this, let me call it, this extremely pluralistic postmodern condition. I don't want to give the word postmodern just to the narrow academic version of it that emerged in the 70s, in particular around deconstruction and a kind of skeptical existentialist and epistemic attitude towards the world, towards reality, towards the self, etc. That's part of the postmodern picture, but part of the postmodern picture is also the phenomenon of synchronicity and its mystery. Depth psychology is part of it. Psychedelic initiation is part of it. The sheer multicultural cornucopia of multiple worldviews that are part of our life world today, that's part of the postmodern, as is feminism and post-colonialism and deep ecology, etc. All these are part of the picture, and one could say that in some ways the postmodern that we are in represents a kind of crucible of transformation, an initiatory transformation, almost a rite of passage that we in the species of Homo sapiens, and in some sense late modern civilization, carrying not only all of Homo sapiens, but all of the Earth community into this tremendous critical transformation. We are all engaged in it, all involved in it, and out of this will emerge a new era, a new worldview, a new set of assumptions that bring greater coherence into the society. That has happened every time in the past, but also even looking at the larger evolutionary picture, even after the great mass extinctions of the past, there is, if you look at the incredible sort of diagrams that have been created, they're called spindle diagrams, of what happens in the course of, say, the last 500 million years in Earth's evolution. When there has been a great extinction, there is a narrowing, of course, of all the multiplicity of species, and then there's a dying to an old age, and then what happens is there's a tremendous differentiation, radiation, diversification of new species that emerge out of those surviving ones, and with quite remarkable consequences every single time. And I take some faith in that long view on many levels, both from a spiritual point of view, which synchronicities have a few suggestions about, as well as on this more evolutionary, biological, geological level of understanding. So if we, I think, in the face of the disenchanted worldview that many of us who received a good modern education have introjected, the search for a ground of purpose and meaning that transcends our human subjectivity. That's not just a projection of our interior emotional needs or aspirations, but may also be something that exists towards which we aspire, that is in some sense transhuman, though humanly participated. This has become an urgent human spiritual priority in our time. And for many people, synchronicities today are directly relevant to that search. So let's start with just a handy definition of synchronicity. I doubt that anybody needs anything like this in a conference coming out of this particular center and who have signed up for this particular series of lectures. But it's good to have some parameters defined to begin with. So I'll describe a synchronicity as the phenomenon of coincidences in which two or more independent events which have no apparent causal connection nevertheless appear to form a meaningful pattern. And on occasion, this patterning can strike us as so extraordinary that it's difficult to believe that the coincidence has been produced only by chance. The events and the convergence of the events in such a way that they have this impact on us, it gives a distinct impression of having been precisely arranged, invisibly orchestrated. Now, I use the term no apparent causal connection, which of course comes from Jung. The title of his monograph on synchronicity in 1952, of course, was Synchronicity and a Causal Connecting Principle, with the focus very much on acausality. But the fact of the matter is, in another era, in Greek philosophy, synchronicities definitely reflect quite sophisticated forms of causality. On the one hand, as Jung emphasized all the time, the presence of archetypal patterning that unites the synchronicities, those are essentially what Aristotle would call the formal cause. And if you don't just limit the definition of causality to linear mechanistic causality, like one billiard ball hitting the next and having its impact, force, momentum, direction, and everything, that if you instead think of causality in the more, from what a number of us think was a more sophisticated, multi-dimensional understanding, where there's not just efficient causation, which is more like linear, and material causation, which have been the province of modern science. But if there's also formal causation, that in which things are patterned, things are coming into their form, and if Rupert Sheldrake's done great work along this line, and then also that there has been that at work, from Aristotle's point of view, is final causation, by which he meant there's a telos, there's a purpose, there's an end towards which the events are moving to fulfill a potentiality and bring it into actuality. And Jung's perspective on synchronicities is, one, they tend to be archetypally constellated, therefore the formal cause is present, but also they tend to be in service of wholeness. They are constantly moving our narrowed and often one-sided conscious attitude towards to opening up to a larger reality, towards what we're leaving out of the picture, towards what we are unconscious of. So it's a movement towards wholeness, integrating the unconscious into the consciousness, and in so doing, moving us more from the narrow point of view of our myopic egoic awareness into something more like a holistic perspective. I think of synchronicities as, in some sense, like they're like a communication from the whole to the part, with us, our conscious attitude being the part, and the whole could be seen as our own unconscious, but ultimately, because of the very nature of synchronicities, which do not simply originate in any obvious way from our own subjectivity, but seem to be independently constellated in external events that coincide with our inner state of being. That points to the presence of some kind of telos that's at work with synchronicities, that is moving us towards wholeness. And Jung formulated this as the presence of the self archetype. That the self archetype is that very principle that orders, organize, moves towards wholeness, that has a telos at work in it, moving us all from our state of potentiality to actuality, towards becoming, as Nietzsche would say, become what thou art. And that's what the whole individuation process is about. Individuation, in Jung's idea, is basically a kind of flowering of that individual's true being. And that true being doesn't just stop in, as it were, the potted plant of our skin encapsulated ego, to use Alan Watts's phrase, but rather we are all expressions of the earth itself. We're all planted in the earth. We're all planted in the cosmos, in what we might leap forward to say is a divine cosmos. And our finding our own actuality, our bringing our potential into actual manifestation, which is a lifelong journey, it requires a certain it requires a constant dying to old identities and old structures, and being willing to be born into a new heaven and a new earth, being born into a new identity, a new set, a new worldview, a new understanding. And part of that is breaking out of the sense that we're all individuated potted plants, separated from each other, but in fact that we are all expressions of a collective archetypal cosmic ground, an anima mundi, a soul of the world that informs our personal unconscious, underlies it, and through synchronicities is often sort of like Hansel and Gretel getting the little hints from the pebbles or the breadcrumbs on the way through the forest, as a way of finding our way home. I think of synchronicity somewhat like that. So in that sense, we could say that the the synchronicities help us see that our individual lives and even the cosmos itself may be patterned by archetypal principles that reflect the subtle workings of a pervasive intelligence. Now, Jung first publicly mentioned, many of you will know this phenomenon in the late 1920s in a seminar on dreams. But he'd already been, through his studies of both of astrology from around 1911 or so, and of the I Ching, he was already picking up what would become early intimations of where he would finally end up in terms of this broad understanding of synchronicity. His early conversations with Einstein, he said, played a role back when Einstein had dinner a couple times with him in Zurich, and then much later with Wolfgang Pauli, his erstwhile patient and friend and collaborator. These played a major role in his evolving thinking. And then finally, in the very last paper that Jung gave at Eranos, his beloved annual gathering there on the shores of Lago Maggiore, with and hosted by Olga Frobe, Captain Frobe. He, in that his very last personal paper that he contributed in 1951, he set out his initial formulation called On Synchronicity, and then the next year, in 1952, he did the fuller monograph. So it took Jung over 20 years to kind of formulate the theory publicly, and brave the ridicule of the scientific establishment in doing that. And the question is, why did he expend so much on this task? And I think we can answer that he recognized what was at stake. In some sense, what was at stake was the entire modern worldview. Roderick calls our attention to a couple of letters, a letter he wrote in 1955 to RFC Hull, where he said, Jung says, the latest comment about synchronicity is that it cannot be accepted because it shakes the security of our scientific foundations, as if this were not exactly the goal I am aiming at. And then on the same day, he wrote to Michael Fordham of the impact of synchronicity upon what he called the fanatical one-sidedness of scientific philosophy. You can see certain themes here coming right from the Red Book explorations that have become, we now have the privilege of knowing so much more about as a result of its publication some 15 years ago. And Victor Mansfield, my friend, the physicist, late friend and professor at Colgate and Cornell universities, he said, I have encountered too many synchronistic experiences, both in my life and that of others, to ignore them. Yet these surprisingly common experiences pose tremendous psychological and philosophical challenges for our worldview. They are especially troubling experiences for me as a physicist trained within the culture of scientific materialism. But why are they troubling? I think the physicist and philosopher of science, Percy Bridgman, many years at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology here in the state, he put it very concisely. He said, coincidences are what are left over after you've applied a bad theory. Quite to the point. And because this threatens the old order of materialism, it has to be negated with a great show of force and confidence. as we see when something Thomas Kuhn pointed out, like the more robust the potential threat of a new paradigm is to an established scientific paradigm, the greater the skeptical resistance will emerge. The greater the scorn, the more complete the putting it's in its place. And so we have, with the synchronistic phenomena and of many kinds, you have kind of skeptic police, debunkers, psychops, the scientific investigation of the claims of the paranormal, the nothing butters. It's nothing but this. It's just random chance that's being selected by our need for meaning. All of these reflect, I believe, a certain fundamentalist form of conventional science or scientism. May I just ask, Roderick, is my audio coming through okay? Are people getting good?
Perfect for me. I
okay.
imagine so, yeah.
Okay, great. Always good to check before you go on the whole hour and then suddenly find out it was not coming through. So something that many of you will have noticed, I'm sure, is that synchronicities seem to occur with special intensity and frequency at what we might call threshold periods of life. They seem to constellate around deaths, around births, major personal crises, near-death experiences, spiritual emergencies, deep romantic awakenings, falling in love, and so forth. And in terms of our series title, the words from that title, Living Synchronicity, we could distinguish three different forms of how we experience synchronicities that are characteristic of our age. And these three forms often turn out to be three distinct stages in how they are experienced, three deepening stages, we might say. Here I'm looking at basically a kind of phenomenology of synchronistic experience. So in stage one, you have much more of a it's those kinds of relatively minor but suggestive coincidences that they might hit you for a second. Wow, that's unusual. That's queer, as the term used to be, or that's kind of remarkable, isn't it? But they don't force a big change of view, and they can be easily sort of forgotten about or dismissed. It's just one of those things that seems to happen, and they're not earth-shaking, existentially transformational, etc. And then there's the kind that has a quality of metaphysical, that has a metaphysical impact that deeply changes the philosophical and even spiritual horizon that one lives in. That it is so challenging that it causes one to think something more is going on here than I assumed was possible, given my understanding of the fact that we live in a vast, indifferent universe, and that by and large, life is unfolding with a certain randomness, except to the extent that I and others are shaping with our intentions. But the idea that something has happened here that looks like there is some larger orchestrating intelligence that's at work, that is almost purposefully focused on me or on my life, that can be quite a wake up. It can have quite a transformational effect. And now I have to say that it is often, there are cases where a person who largely stays within the first stage, where they can kind of dismiss synchronistic phenomena as being as being ones that are not worth creating a new worldview. They're not paradigm shifters. A person who is largely treating such synchronistic phenomena in that way then has what we might, for other people, regard as a stage 2 transformational synchronicity, like the classic one that Jung gives in his paper at Eranos, the golden scarab knocking on the window at the same moment that the resistant patient, who reduces all kind of Jungian kinds of symbolic interpretations to, oh, that's nothing but, and Jung says she had such a fine Cartesian intellect that could kind of rationally dispense with any interpretation that might suggest a deeper psychospiritual process being at work. And then one day she was sharing, as I think probably everybody knows this already, sharing that dream about a golden scarab being presented to her as an expensive jewelry, and Jung is thinking to himself, wow, this is quite a symbol. The golden scarab is, a symbol coming out of really the whole ancient Egyptian mythology of the solar journey, the death rebirth process, etc. And he's thinking in these terms, but there's this insistent kind of tapping at the window. He finally picks up the window and picks up a little insect and offers it to the woman and says, and here's your golden scarab, which was a golden green scarab from that latitude of Switzerland, was the closest that you could get to the Egyptian form of it from the original myth. And so he was quite that had quite an impact on her, and as Jung at least reported, from that point on, the therapy progressed quite satisfactorily, as he would say. So, but if you have an investment, a psychological and perhaps even professional investment in a disenchanted cosmology, with a sense of an exclusive humanist location of highest value and agency and intelligence in the whole universe, then it is possible to hold on to that more dismissive first stage, because you can see through it, you can rationalize it, sometimes with somewhat unimpressive rationalizations, or you can compartmentalize it. There's like, this thing happened, but there's no way I can integrate it into my whole worldview. It just doesn't cohere, and so it just gets compartmentalized and then diminishes, or some other form of denial. I was just saying, it's projection of my emotions onto this neutral random phenomenon. And we see this at work as well. But then I want to point out there's also a third stage. And after the metaphysically, spiritually transformational awakening to a new sense of the world, a sense that more is going on than meets the eye, a sense that the world is deeper than day can comprehend, as Nietzsche put it, the sense that there are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in our modern philosophy, as Shakespeare might put it to Horatio. That's after that threshold has been crossed. And as I say, those often happen at times of threshold experiences, spiritual emergencies, encounters with death, around births, etc. There can be, or all kinds of personal crises or romantic awakenings and so forth. After that threshold has been crossed, there can come into one's life a very different attitude about synchronicities. You can still get quite powerful ones that are very moving, but by and large, you begin to notice that we live in a synchronistically patterned universe, and that now one is alert to synchronistic phenomena that suggest a that and that alertness that we can bring to the experience and the presence of synchronicities in our everyday life can open up a number of responses, one of which is aesthetic, in a sense, just kind of delighting in the almost like brilliantly creative aesthetic patterning of life that synchronicities point to. It also is a kind can serve as a sort of continuing spiritual nourishment. The sense that grace is constantly present in our lives, that that we are not just strangers in a strange land. We live in a world that has deep mysteries, and including this possibility that there are larger forces at work, highly intelligent, complex, aesthetically oriented, psychologically and morally and spiritually informed, with capacities that transcend our limited modern understanding of how the world interacts with the human psyche and the human mind. Jung, even though he tended to put his focus very much on either the very dramatic awakenings of a resistant person to a new understanding of life or of themselves. And he also put a tremendous amount of focus, especially in his monograph, on connecting all this with parapsychological experimentation and quantum physics, relativity theory. He brings in all these scientific phenomena to kind of expand his notion of synchronicity. He also brings in many kinds of things like like telepathy, precognition, telekinesis, and so forth. And some of these involving, say, precognition, or some of the work in parapsychology or in quantum physics, to me represent Jung's attempt. He's living in a time, at this point, it's like the 1940s, 1950s. Science which has a more, today, is like both highly valued, and at the same time, there's more of a critical awareness of its limitations, its potential shadow side. The sciences had the much more comprehensive upper hand in that era, and the one way that Jung could see that he could bring something like synchronicity into the cultural conversation without being laughed out of court was to also connect it to various scientific and paranormal science and so forth, phenomena, in such a way that he didn't feel as out on a limb as he would have otherwise been. And I think it's quite understandable that he did that. He also was himself a scientist. He very much had a strong identity as a scientist, an investigator, a physician, etc. But if you look at how he lived his life, how he practiced his relationship with a synchronistic universe, it was far less concerned with bringing in the sciences, and much more bringing in the psychology and the spirituality of our experience of synchronicities. And just to give one example, I ran across when I was in Zurich one time, and I picked out a little book called Remembrances of C.G. Jung, Emma Jung, and Tony Wolfe, that of all things had been published by my own here in San Francisco Institute of C.G. Jung Institute here of San Francisco, published by Joseph Henderson here, and edited and introduced by him. Wonderful little book of anecdotes and so forth, and one of those tells is by Heinrich Fierz, and Heinrich Fierz had been asked to come to see Jung. This is written after Jung had passed away, and Heinrich Fierz had been requested by a publisher to speak with Jung about whether a particular book by a deceased man should be published. I believe he doesn't say that, but I believe the deceased man was a scientist, and I'm pretty sure that this was Marcus Fierz, the brother of Heinrich Fierz. Marcus Fierz being the mathematician who Jung was writing a lot to when he was deeply involved with his synchronistic statistical researchers with astrology and so forth back around late 40s and early 50s. Anyway, Jung Fierz comes to the door there of Jung's house in Kuznach, knocks on that famous green door there with over the door is carved the words vocatus atque non vocatus deus ad erit, called or not called, the God will be present, or the God will come. Jung's very strong sense of, in a sense, that the divine will come, whether or not you call upon the divine, and the divine will be present. In fact, very often when you're not calling the divine, and it can be upsetting. It's something that brings you up short, that knocks you off your ego's path, like Paul being knocked off the horse on the road to Damascus. So, excuse me, been talking here for a bit. So he comes to the door. The meeting's at 5:30. He comes to the door, and no, I guess the meeting's at 5 o'clock. He comes to the door. Then they have a meeting. They discuss it for a while, and Heinrich can tell that Jung seems to be getting a little impatient with the process. It gets a little short with him, dismissing the proposal that this book be published. And at a certain point, Jung looks at his watch, at which moment Heinrich Fierz thinks, okay, he's going to be calling an end to this conversation, which did not go the way Heinrich had thought it would, or the way that Jung was not feeling positively towards it. But then Jung is looking at his watch, and he says, "That's very peculiar. What time does your watch say?" And Heinrich says 5:35, and Jung says, my watch says 5 after 5. When did you arrive here? And he said, well, 5 o'clock as we agreed. And so Jung says, your watch is correct. My watch is wrong. Let us start this conversation again. And they start again. And within a very few minutes, Jung is seeing the proposal from a totally different perspective, recognizing that it should be published, and the conversation proceeds in that way. Now, I bring up this little vignette because it perfectly shows how Jung was constantly alert to phenomena in the field of his experience, and he could read the symbolic coherencies that unite the inner world and the outer world. He could read the archetypal and symbolic meaning of a given field, a context, a situation, as easily as other people read the newspaper. And he instantly saw that about the time that his watch was malfunctioning, his mind seems to have also stopped and malfunctioned and wasn't taking in the new information properly. But I want to point out what kind of a psychology it takes to have seen that. Many other people would just look at their watch and just say, damn, I just had this fixed by the Swiss watchman, which Jung had, and it's already not working. This is such a bummer. End of meaning. Nice to see you, Heinrich. But instead, he takes this as meaningful, and he uses it as a message from the outer to the inner, and in doing so, corrects for the one-sided narrowness of his conscious attitude. And that's constantly how he looked at synchronicities as serving that movement towards wholeness, towards that, whether it's the watch or it could be the golden scarab coming in the window. Barbara Hanna talks about how patients who would see Jung in his later years, see him in the garden room at his house, Jung would pay attention to when the emotional field within the therapeutic room, the therapy consulting room, was getting more charged with whatever was being discussed or shared. Jung would notice that the waves on the lake coming onto shore would be increasing with greater force. The wind would pick up. A flock of birds would suddenly scatter. And for him, these were all signs of a larger field that was sending the message of how the whole is reflecting something that's going on in the part that needs to be attended to. So what I'd like to now do, something that I found very important in any synchronistic discussion, is to recognize that it's only in the context of the modern worldview that synchronicity could even be conceived as a phenomenon, that it could be registered as a puzzling anomaly, and then named and then theorized. It's only in the modern worldview that the concept of synchronicity would be necessary or even possible. It's simply not an issue in other eras or cultures. What we call synchronicities would have been called providence in another time, or by others in our own time. Or it would be called karma at work, or it was the work of the gods, or of the stars, or the ancestral spirits, or of the animate natural world, or it was God, Allah, and so on. It could be helpful to use a couple of diagrams to depict how human experience of synchronistic phenomena has evolved. And so I'm just going to share my screen here for a second. One of the massive facts of the evolution of humanity's worldviews is that the modern sensibility has certain underlying assumptions that are sharply different from those of pre-modern and non-modern cultures. And so, and the easiest way to see this is to compare the basic kind of post-Cartesian modern worldview with what I'll call here the primal worldview. It could be called something that's called primordial or tribal or traditional indigenous worldview, etc. And can everybody see the? Yeah, great. So on the right, you can see here's the modern worldview. Notice there's a very sharp line differentiating the self from the world, the inner from the outer. And by contrast, the outer world is whited out, as it were, while the shading exists only inside the self. And the shading there reflects all the qualities that we can associate with consciousness, purposeful intelligence, soul, agency, value, and the capacity for recognizing value, interiority, etc. All these are seen as characteristic of the human being, of the human self, and only of the human self, while the world is seen as radically distinct and different. It is an object to the subject of the self. It has been disenchanted, and it's been disenchanted compared to the state of the primal worldview, where intelligence and soul pervades the entire world, all of nature, all of the cosmos, and the human self has a permeable relationship to the whole. It participates in the larger matrix of meaning and purpose. It's fully embedded in an animate world. There is an anima mundi, a soul of the world that the human psyche is constantly participating in, is penetrated by. It ritually can participate in the inner life of nature, which is also experienced as being the divine is present in nature. It can be present in the human self in a form that is particularly accessed in ritual conditions and so forth. And even the relationship of the individual to the tribe is very permeable as well. The identity is much more we compared to the I think, therefore I am individual state of the modern Cartesian self. And so we can see in the several thousand years process, accelerated in the last several hundred years, that brought us from this earlier condition to this later condition. You can see basically the entire anima mundi, the entire realm of intelligence, purposefulness, soul, agency, value, etc., has been introjected into the human self, which alone is seen as having these highly developed qualities, while the world itself has been disenchanted. This is the world of fact. We have a capacity for value. The world is a world of fact. We have a capacity for purposeful consciousness. The world is purposeless. It unfolds in a random way. It is not conscious, etc. I'm particularly describing the most this is pre the kind of work that the Scientific and Medical Network and the Paris Center and the Galileo Commission has been doing, and Brian Swim and cosmological work, and Rupert Sheldrake's work, etc. This is the modern worldview before all that has been taken in. Virtually every field today is going through a huge transformation. I know David Pete devoted himself to basically breaking out of this constrained, disenchanted universe. So you could see this on the one hand as tremendously empowering the human self. We stop projecting onto the world. We gain greater agency. We can shape the world to our own benefit. We can use our independent rationality as a kind of instrumental reason that can better help serve human benefit by understanding and exploiting the world, rather than being subject to the world as being having its own moral, spiritual parameters that we have to align ourselves to, and that we may be porously vulnerable to, because this is also a world not just of the spirits and ancestors and the animate flora and fauna. It's also a world of demons and dark magic and vulnerability that can take possession of the self, etc. So we move from this porous self to the buffered self, to use the terms of Charles Taylor, the great philosopher. Okay, so that on the one hand is seen as a real progress. In fact, this is part of the whole myth of progress that has driven modernity. But it is also can be seen from another point of view in our postmodern era as a tremendous act of appropriation by an anthropocentric appropriation of the entire anima mundi of the cosmos and placing it within the human self. And not only in the human self, but then pushing it down into the unconscious, where it needs to be recovered by the depth psychologists like Jung and paid attention to, which eventually opens us back up to the larger enchanted world. There was a necessary middle stage here between the primal and the modern, which I've described here. This was from a book that was more focused on the coming of the modern worldview out of the Western Judeo-Christian and Platonic Aristotelian worldview, that there was a tremendous movement out of the more immanent soul of the anima mundi primal world to right across the world during the axial era, first millennium BCE, not only in ancient Israel and in ancient Greece, but also in ancient India, ancient China. There was a almost simultaneous recognition of a transcendent divinity, transcosmic, that was the ultimate unitive source of value, agency, meaning, and purpose, and that the human being had a special relationship to it through philosophical illumination in Plato's case, and Aristotle, through prophetic gifts as the Hebrew prophets had, and they could say to the king, yeah, you're powerful, but just because you say something is good doesn't make it good, because I am in contact with Yahweh, the King of Kings, who can. That's where the true good lies, and I can critique your society as not being good or not being just because I can compare it to this transcendent reality. So the same thing in India and China. There can be critiques made of the social milieu that has been religiously the religious and the political hierarchies have been combined, and this can now be critiqued from the axial transcendent view. But what that does, though, is it starts a process of emptying the world of its soul till only the human and the divine matter, very prominent at times by the where it's all about God and man. Man's made in the image of God, etc. Man can rule the earth, etc. and I'm using the word man. There is a strong gendered quality to this vision of the human and of the divine. There are masculine symbolizations of the human and the divine that forward this differentiation. I'll just show you one other diagram here where we get to the late modern worldview, which is shows us in the post-Copernican, the self and the earth and the human species have been totally decentered in a vast cosmic void, and we're wandering specks of dust, and entirely peripheral, infinitesimal, compared to that much more robust sense of being embedded in a meaningful land and universe and souled, ancestrally present world that the primordial self enjoyed, but was also porously subject to. Okay, so that brings us up to the late modern worldview, and I just want to bring in how synchronicity played a role here by bringing in this other diagram. This is a little more complex. I want to bring in, first of all, there was a crucial stage, especially helpful for us to know in terms of synchronicities. Here's the primal, here's the modern. This is what I've been, comparing. And then the necessary axial midpoint, which helped constellate a sense of transcendent unitive selfhood, the ultimate subject, God or providence or Buddha consciousness or Brahman, the Neoplatonic one, etc. And then that allows, because of the human identification with the divine transcendent, that allows the modern eventually, it introjects, much like when Michelangelo paints the Sistine Chapel creation of Adam, and God is touching Adam at the moment of creation. Right at that moment, the Copernican revolution is unfolding. Copernicus has just during those years gotten the insight of the heliocentric universe. It's right at that moment that Luther is breaking out of the Catholic Church and initiating the whole differentiated religious and eventually highly secular world that unfolds. Many things are taking place right at that moment, the world explorations, the conquistadors, etc. But there is an interjection there's a kind of like divine transmission that takes place that at first is, man is like God's lieutenant in this world that he is to recreate to reflect God's glory. But eventually God is dispensed with, and we get to the much more self-enclosed.
Sorry, Rick,
Yes.
We're still looking at your figure 4 here, actually. I don't know whether your other one came up, at least on my screen.
Oh my. Okay, I'm so glad that you
Well,
pointed out.
It was all very clear, so I didn't want to interrupt you, but I'm sure it would have
Yes,
been clear
indeed.
if we
I
saw
guess I had to come out.
Oh yeah, there we are. Yeah, great.
All right. So what I was just saying, so here's the primal on the left, here's the modern, which we are basically comparing ourselves to, or understanding the great transition from, how the axial played a role in constellating a sense of the human special relationship to the divine transcendent that in a sense put the human being in a different relationship. Instead of being embedded by a surrounding world in which the human being in the primal was not seen as being like the crown of creation and separate from and superior to the rest of the world, but coming out of this sense of the special relationship of the human to the transcendent unity, particularly in the European and modern, North Atlantic world. There is an interjection of essentially, like as I was saying, Michelangelo's God is touching Adam, and this becomes, particularly because you've got the whole medieval period coming in between, the modern introjects, the modern self introjects without the presence of God any longer needed. First, we are God's lieutenant, creating the world in God's, to reflect God's glory, but it is seen as on its own, disenchanted. That disenchantment, by the way, was carefully built up in the course of the medieval era through through nominalism and through the effort to disenchant, basically to break away from the sense of a porous self that was subject to the hierarchies that combined religious and political participation in the divine. And the reason I brought up this fuller kind of mandala of worldviews is that between the primal and the axial, there is the all-important archaic civilizations like ancient Egypt, ancient India, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient China. Each of these had an archaic stage where what was felt as pervading this local immanent tribal land of spirits and intelligence and so forth, the ancestral spirits, it starts to, what is most valued and the greatest agency, the greatest intelligence and purpose, it starts to be put up more towards the heavens, from the immanent more towards the heavens, the stars, where the gods are experienced, Mount Olympus, the top, and then of course the king, the pharaoh, participates in a unique way with the divine. All the great religious rituals in Egypt, in Mesopotamia, are done by the pharaoh, the king, and his consort, the priests and priestesses around him. They mediate the entire human relationship to the divine, and the religious hierarchy of the cosmos and of the human being is played out in the social and political hierarchy. These are highly militarized, highly top-down societies, very dynamic, great civilizations with large monumental architecture, and in a sense the pyramids, the ziggurats, aspiring towards the heavens, where the higher powers are now experienced. You can see there's this elevation that's taking place of agency, power, value, intelligence, consciousness, and then the axial breakthrough, in a sense, moves this elevation right up to the top. And so in terms of synchronicities, here for the primal world, they're not even remarked on. That's because we live in an animate world where always, oh, well, eagle is telling me this, or the forest is communicating this or that, or my ancestor is telling me through this thing happening, etc. It is a synchronistic universe which does not require, because it is an animate world, it does not require a separate phenomenon called synchronicity. My intelligence and interiority participates in the world's intelligence and purposefulness and so forth, and interiority. Everything that is objective in the world that we see in the modern world has an inner being from the primal point of view. This starts to shift in the archaic period because of larger societies, more complex, and it's the synchronicities start becoming more a matter of as above, so below. The astral correlations between planetary movements and the sun and the moon with human phenomena in this world, with it's seen as being, these planets are either the gods or the residents of the gods, or they are sacred to the gods, as Plato's late eponymous or eponymous dialogue puts it. And that's a kind of halfway point to the full disclosure of the axial period, that there is a transcendent divinity that created this world that may act through the astral synchronicities and as above, so below, and that's what the medieval carried. That's why astrology was so prominent during all these periods, going right to the birth of the modern. But it is ultimately the divine providence, God's will, etc., that is determining the nature of what happens to us. And so synchronicities reflect God, or reflect the cosmic intelligence, the Neoplatonic one. And then you have the medieval world, but where you've got both church and state, but they both are interlocking with you know, the Holy Roman Empire and the divine right of kings, etc., with the papal church that has participating directly in the divine power, and then society has lesser and lesser connection to that power. But nevertheless, the medieval era, as Jung himself pointed out, even with his own grandparents, were growing up and his parents in a medieval world where even the primal magic and the sense of the enchanted forest, etc., the stopped clocks when people die, all that's still present here in the medieval period, and for many even in Europe, right into the modern period. But for the more and more modern sensibility, we move into a fully immanent frame, to use Charles Taylor's term, and not only is the world disenchanted, but also God becomes, providence, etc., becomes a dispensable illusion, perhaps something that people just project out of their infantile needs, as Freud would put it, and opium the people who are being oppressed, as Marx would put it, etc. And so then finally you get to the fully immanent frame where there's the sense of progress. The myth of progress is driving this, and we have this great sense of human autonomy. However, that sets in motion what I showed you before, this peripheral sense of alienation and disenchantment in a world in which we are essentially specks of meaning-seeking dust in a vast cosmic void. And that's when synchronicities start to become more and more present, perceived, theorized. Jung comes along, and then the question is, why are there so many conferences on synchronicity now? Why is synchronicity gaining the attention of so many open-minded scientists and philosophers, that we have entire working groups on synchronicity? And you've got Scientific and Medical Network and the Galileo Commission. You've got the Paris Center. There was a big conference on synchronicity here last decade that involved many Jungians coming together, as well as Rupert Sheldrake and myself and others were speaking here in Palm Springs, all devoted to synchronicity. Why are these happening? Why also in terms of the synchronicities that I presented in Cosmos and Psyche, where there's a kind of recovery of the enchanted universe and the astral correlations between the movements of the planets and the sun and the moon in relationship to the archetypal patterning of human experience, and how consistent that is as well. Why is there this resurgence of synchronistic phenomena with such intensity? It resembles the kind of intensity that happens at every great, or at so many individualized threshold periods that I talked about. Personal crises, births, deaths. How many people have been involved with someone precious to them who has died, where then something happens right around the time of the death, around the time of the funeral, sometimes around the time of the in the days and weeks after, that give very clear synchronistic suggestion that that being who has passed away is in some sense still present, or that at least the universe as a whole seems to be mindful of this passing and is communicating something to somebody who wants, who in some sense might not have been looking for it, but in some sense is nourished by that synchronistic phenomenon. Well, what I'd like to suggest is that this postmodern period, which I've tried to convey the multivalent quality of our postmodern and the indeterminacy, not knowing what's real, for sure. John Doerly said we need an altar to the Virgin Mary of perpetual uncertainty in our postmodern era, that kind of an altar would be appropriate. The sense of uncertainty, the sense of multiple realities, the sense that there are starting points of assumptions that we can take that keep us within a disenchanted universe, but there's other assumptions that can bring us into a greater sense of the ensouled world, and the greater connection to the primal universe in this sense. Also, there could easily be an opening going up to the axial, to recognition of the transcendent reality that is nevertheless somehow present in the immanent. We get a lot of this through the current work with people like Alfred North Whitehead and panentheism and so forth, where the transcendent divine is also recognized as being an immanent divine, and we have a more participatory relationship to the whole and to spiritual realities. I'm just about finishing off here. I want to give the rest of our time to discussion, but I just want to point out that there's something about our era, the postmodern era, that suggests many of the qualities that are so characteristic of a rite of passage. The sense of disorientation, of not knowing for sure what's real, the sense of impending crisis or doom, the sense of crisis of identity, of who am I, of what is the human being? Is it a cancer on this earth that is causing horrific mass extinctions to the entire biosphere? Or are we the crown of creation? Or are we how like an angel in our perfection? The Shakespearean ode in Hamlet that's so beautiful, and then ends with, but what are we, this quintessence of dust as well. All these are in play, and the resurgence of synchronicities in our time seem to me to be also reflective of the universe paying attention in some sense, reflecting the larger moral and spiritual kind of majesty of the whole, of which we human beings we can participate in, but only, in our up to a point. And we never fully encompass, but we can be honored, privileged, graced by participating in, and that we may be getting indications of something to help keep that sense of faith and trust that is necessary, that sense of hope in a larger future that may await on this other side of what is, I think, realistically, a very clear sense of descent that we are all going through. A descent on many levels. It's a descent from the primal enchantment with the disenchanted world that's been colonized and extracted with such great pathological consequences and injustice. A descent from that great axial sense of religious conviction and transcendent providence overlooking all things. A descent also from the modern sense of self-confidence with its progress, that we're moving towards a new world through human reason and will, and the heroic genius of man, the ascent of man. Again, I'm genderizing it because there is a strong gendered quality that gets superimposed on this, and that there's a fall from that as we realize those strategies of straightforward modern appropriation of the world to serve human benefit, objectification of the world to serve the human subject, is like a sorcerer's apprentice that has triggered a catastrophic situation, and we're in a kind of dark night of the soul. And it's at that time that perhaps powerful signals start coming in of, by the way, you live in a larger universe where that is in service of beauty. It's in service of humor. I haven't mentioned this, but humor plays such a role in synchronicities. It also is constantly working through details. The divine is in the details, telling the story of important synchronicities, which I haven't done here just to avoid taking too much time, but there's so many that one could describe. The synchronicities require narrative context and details to adequately understand. It takes a little time to tell them. As a result, they're not easily categorizable and objectified by modern statistical methods and by the objectifying scientific perspective that wants something without all this kind of messiness of humanistic narrative meaning that has to be given to contextualize the emotional and spiritual impact of synchronicities. Okay, there is lots more that I could easily share. As I said to Eleanor a couple of days ago, the challenge when you have taught 15-week seminars, 3 hours each week, with graduate students on this very topic of synchronicity, like how could I say some of the more I don't know, helpful things in a short time that could help contextualize our understanding of synchronicity, our appreciation of it in a relatively short time, to start off this impressive gathering of experts in synchronicity, and how to compress that into a relatively few minutes, which I probably miserably failed, but at least I've gotten in a few key points that I hope are valuable going forward. So I'd like to open it up to discussion and conversation, comments and questions, and over to you, Roderick.
Well, thank you so much, Rick. You certainly gave us a tremendously rich account of. You did manage to compress the essence. Well, I don't know exactly what you teach in your 15 weeks, but but you certainly conveyed a tremendous amount in that talk, and really important as well to get that the sort of that deep cultural historical perspective on synchronicity, which is often not appreciated, and that very seminal insight you have that in fact, you know, it's modern conditions that require the emergence of the concept of synchronicity. So very, very interesting. And maybe just whilst people are sort of gathering their thoughts and putting together their questions, I can sort of start with a question related to this, which is that I mean, Jung referred to synchronicity as in his lecture in 1951, he referred to it as a modern differentiation of the obsolete concept of correspondence, sympathy, and harmony. You know, so he was very aware that it was an idea that had existed in previous times. And he sort of in his essay, his main essay on it, he looks going all the way back to the ancient Chinese thought, ancient Greek thought, medieval and Renaissance thought, and the early modern philosophy, even Leibniz. You know, so he's aware of all these predecessors, but he calls it a modern differentiation. And I was wondering what different.
Yeah, I
let's see,
think
Roderick, you might have frozen there, Roderick.
I'm frozen.
Yeah,
Okay, but
now we can hear you. Yeah.
now,
Oh, I
now
beg your
you're
pardon.
going.
Yes. Okay. Well, maybe I was
So
talking too
where
much.
you
The
ended,
technology was trying to tell me that. I'll get to my
we,
point.
we just ended. The last thing we heard of yours was Jung emphasizes differentiation from all these background, from the history that he did recognize.
Yeah. Yeah. So I suppose, what do you then think the is distinctively contributed by the modern, because I know in your work you when you talk about sort of the disenchanted period and so on, you're not saying this was a kind of wrong turn, absolutely, that you talk about it as in some way being part of an unfolding process itself, and that it gets folded into some new consciousness and so on. So what do you think has been gained? And in your final diagram there of the sort of deep history mandala, presumably we're not just going to revert into a sort of primal state of being
Right.
again,
Right.
there's and go around the cycle again. But what do you see is going to be the sort of newly
Yeah.
emerging?
The diagram was, I mean, which I just kind of sketched it out. It really should. I want to convey a little bit more that it's more of a spiral where you're reconnecting to previous worldviews. You're integrating, because we're all layered. We've got all of this in us. Every one of our psyches has primal, archaic, axial, medieval. We all are carrying that in us at different layers, much as Jung saw that archaeological layering inside the deep psyche. But in addition, the it's both that circle there was more meant to be a spiral in that it would. I mean, obviously there is a lot of reconnection to, for example, shamanism, neo-shamanism, the psychedelic revolution, the wilderness vision quests, the tremendous appreciation of indigenous cultural traditions that were for so long just discarded as or regarded as savage or needing to be expunged, or all the horrific responses that were characteristic of modern colonialism. And now there is a real recovery of that primal, and in a sense that's having to happen for each of the previous ages, but it's also on a new level. And what I see as that, and as you say, I don't see it as just a wrong turn. I mean, there is a tragic dimension to the differentiation of the human, the empowerment of the human over nature, the differentiation of the individual from the community, of the species from the rest of the Earth community. But there's also an individuation process going on, and individuation often involves a kind of, a sort of Dante-like journey, and at a certain point, like first, I mean, identity is forged in a certain way, sometimes in quite independence of the whole, much like the adolescent almost has to rebel in some sense against what gave her or him birth and nurtured, etc., but also confined in various ways. And there's a rebellion, and often that rebellion can be quite more absolute than it becomes later, when greater maturity comes in and one recognizes a bigger, more complex story. And suddenly, what was it, Mark Twain? Suddenly my parents, now that I've turned 30, they seem to have learned a lot in the last few years. That kind of recognition. So, but I think in terms of the individuation, I can put it much more specifically and maybe helpfully in Jungian terms, that there has been, if we think of that larger kind of spiral mandala of worldviews as representing a kind of journey of initiation, a journey of individuation, in which there was very painstakingly and gradually forged an autonomous human being who could come into relationship to the whole with a new sense of agency and autonomy, and for which it had to create a buffered self to begin with, and had to interject a sense of rational agency and heroic volition and so forth. And having forged that, and you read, say, the Enlightenment philosophers and even Bertrand Russell, or but even going back to Descartes, the sense of robust confidence and that they were carrying, that's also all in us in a certain way. And now, however, we are able to, having forged that autonomous agency and rational capacity and so forth, we can engage the anima mundi without being overwhelmed by it, without being swallowed by it, coming into more sophisticated understanding of how archetypal complexes work, for example, recognizing that archetypes are multivalent and they have shadow and light forms, trivial and profound forms, and that because human agency has been evolved over this time, and we have more of a sense of our own interiority and our own capacity to recognize projections and so forth, we might be able to engage the tremendous power of the anima mundi in ourselves as well as in the world around us as a partner, as a participant. It's an act of participation, not domination, or being dominated by, which would have been very characteristic. You look at astrological uses in earlier eras, how much is like, you're fated to have this, you're going to die young, you'll have 5 children, you're going to marry this kind of person or not. It's very, there's more of a fatalistic, literalistic, deterministic quality to the synchronistic phenomena. And same thing in the primal, where you're more or less, you fit into the tribal tradition, etc. Now suddenly every one of us here has probably gone through a questioning of the worldview that we were socialized by with our parents, church, school, etc., and finding our own way. That kind of autonomy, that kind of, we're each on a path that's our individual path alone in some way, finding our own way. And I guess what I'm trying to convey is perhaps this vision of the universe constellating painstakingly a partner for it's a co-creative interplay between human being and cosmos, between self and world, that permits a kind of sacred marriage, a kind of hieros gamos of what had been radically differentiated and not finding each other. And now something new can emerge that would not have emerged without the differentiation.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. That's a very helpful answer. Thank you. Yeah. So I think maybe we've got some other people with hands up.
We can now bring in a question. Abelardo, would you like to come in and ask a question?
Yes, thank you very much. Well, such a broad scope. Thank you very much, Richard.
Thank you.
My main question, it concerns, the current global predicament we're in, and particularly, I'm interested in your view on the Western kind of science, the Newtonian model that made possible the scientific, industrial, technological civilization we have now, which I understand 2 years ago, approximately, the the humanly constructed mass has overtaken the biomass, the natural biomass of the planet. And so, and now, what's happening, particularly with the phenomena of overshoot and climate change in that context, where we have competing now epistemologies and their relationship to power, and how the people who are in power in the neoliberal global authoritarian phase of capitalism have these very narrow egoic worldviews based on
Yes.
their domination,
Yes.
but the greater of humanity, I think, particularly those of us who live in the global South, we are seeking this sense of oneness, but that this only seems to be possible through these synchronicities, but that are life affirming. That's my intuition. So how can we break through from away from this narrow way of thinking and really embrace this broader new kind of thinking that we're needed, and a new kind of
Yes.
science, etc.
Very and very poignantly represented by the degree to which the North has produced a crisis that the South deeply is experiencing the negative consequences. Not that the North isn't, but it's the injustice that's involved there, and yeah, I think, of course, this would be what you're asking. Of course, is so huge and important. I'll just suggest a couple of thoughts, which is it's when there is a crisis that we are moved to change, and that there is often a questioning of the old identity. And I think in some way, modern civilization has had, I mean, modern civilization, among the many people who are, let's say, kind of conscious agents to a great extent. They're keeping in touch with what's happening in the world. They're well read. They're thoughtful. They've got an open heart and an open mind, and are dealing with where we're at right now as much as each of us can. There is a recognition that something is dying, and what has been lived will not be able to be sustained much longer. And if you have a near-death experience, and I think in many ways the planet is, and humanity are undergoing a kind of spiritual crisis and near-death experience. I mean, many young people are so aware of what's their horizon of future life. I mean, I've got grandchildren. I'm acutely conscious of it, and it's having a tremendous psychic field effect for everyone growing up. And I think it is at times like those that these powerful transformational of changes tend to happen. It is when there is a near-death experience, there tends to be a powerful reconfiguration of moral existential values that nothing else could quite duplicate compared with an encounter with mortality. And in some sense, we are, as a civilization, encountering mortality and having to and going through that kind of questioning. Secondly, one of the things that got lopped off in our civilization was profound sacred initiatory rituals. And because those rituals both reflected an ensouled cosmology, but they also gave access to it and a deeper connection to it. And so by eliminating both the initiatory ritual paths to connect with that deeper reality, and then also theoretically wiping out that deeper reality as just nothing more than a human projection of our infantile needs for meaning, living in a meaningful universe, etc. That that's created a kind of pressure cooker of an initiatory dark night of the soul. And in some sense, I think that points also to the possibility of how we can shift it. And it is happening right now across the world. Many new ritual forms, initiatory rites of passage are being engaged in. Sacred medicines, vision plants, psychedelic therapy, wilderness vision quests, reconnecting to esoteric and mystical and tribal sources of spiritual transformation and so forth are very much coming. And I think if enough what I call heroic communities, such as those surrounding the Paris Center or the Scientific and Medical Network or Schumacher College or California Institute of Integral Studies, Pacifica, Esalen, different places around the world, Wasiwaska in Brazil, Damanhur, etc., Finhorn, where there are groups of people who can, in a sense, hold the vision of the good heroically against the mainstream worldview and support each other going through the powerful transformations that individuals need to in order to take on such a huge task. I think this the existence of these many heroic communities around the world and of a changing paradigm that many are recognizing the need for and the embrace of a vision and getting a vision of, I think those are going to play a crucial role. It takes hope in a dark time to act when it doesn't look like the forces that we have available to us are enough to shift the levers of power in Washington, D.C. and corporate boardrooms and so forth. But you never know what's going to come down. And this life is a very mysterious one. And I think we each can just best find what we are good at, find what we take joy in, find others to work with that we can collaborate, enjoy with, and anything that can help the world and that we can contribute, I think is what we can do. We don't choose an era like this, at least consciously, to live in. What was that? I think that was Frodo getting his the wisdom from Gandalf. But it's what we do with when we find ourselves in an era like this. Can we rise to the occasion? Can we draw on powerful resources that perhaps will only come to us if we do take the chance, open ourselves to these larger spiritual possibilities? Anyway, I hope that is an initial response to your very good question. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So we have just under 10 minutes and we have 2 more questions. So
Okay.
Richard, please come in.
Thank you, Eleanor. And Richard, thank you very, very much indeed. Your own experience and comments tally wholly with my own. And the map that you've given, the historical globality of it, is absolutely superb. I've got actually discussion points more than actual questions, several. Well, the first one, I'm a poet, so I'm also speaking in this series. I'm the last one, and my stance is very much connected with poetry. So you mentioned Aristotle, and in connection with the threshold, I think it's really significant that Aristotle commented on this in the context of poetry. In his Poetics, he talks about peripetia and anagnorisis, and they go together. So this is the moment of change, peripetia, and anagnorisis, which is recognition and discovery. So a lot of what you say absolutely ties in with the whole of poetry, the spirit of poetry, you also mentioned that the divine is in the detail, and I leapt at that because here we have William Blake, the minute particulars, which in the prophetic books, which connects with the universal spirit and the anima mundi. You have Gerard Manley Hopkins's In Stress and Inscape, which is precisely the detail, the uniqueness of the detail, which reflects and embodies the whole. On what you say about the opening of the threshold, my own personal experience is that after a major synchronistic experience, and mine happened many, many years ago, there is a constant rippling effect, a wave-like effect, which spreads through all of experience since that moment. And that's a kind of, I want to use the word infection, but without the negative sense of infection.
Yes, yes.
The only query I've got really, and this is perhaps an argument, is terminology. My own sense, and I just put this to you as an idea, my own sense is that postmodern is no longer an adequate term. I think it was a pretty silly term when it was invented, because as poet Octavio Paz says, you can't be more modern than the modern. The modern means now. Postmodern, what does that mean? More now than now? Now, I would suggest that we're actually coming out of the postmodern experience, and we're on the threshold of something new. Now, I haven't yet got a word for it.
There's the rub.
Well, I have got a suggestion, and it's
okay.
You said humor comes into it. So rather than nationalist, and goodness me, we're seeing all sorts of crazy males, who think of themselves actually all as heroic, in the Homeric primitive mode, as great nationalists. This is a period of nationalism emerging. I'm proposing, not entirely jokingly, imagine nationalists.
Okay.
But I wonder what you, anyway,
yes.
That's my joking suggestion, but what about my dissatisfaction with?
No, I appreciate that. I mean, in some sense, every one of the terms, primal, archaic, axial, medieval, modern, every one of them can be questioned, and there's problems with each one of them, one could point out. That's what we scholars do. And postmodern, there's great battle for ownership of it. On the one hand, like the French deconstructionists, put one take on it that certainly, especially in the literary world, had a big impact, and to some extent the philosophy world. But also postmodern was that use of it, that appropriation of it, was strongly criticized by integral philosophers like like the process Whiteheadians, like David Ray Griffin, who and Charlene Spretnak, who pointed out like that version of postmodern just means most modern, more skeptical, more isolated, more radically autonomous, without a sense of the larger whole, the embeddedness, etc., and that we need to recognize that for something to be postmodern, it really is a constructive postmodernism, not a deconstructive, and more integral postmodern. So, and all my point is, I mean, it's a placeholder. One could call this, maybe we will call it someday, this is the initiatory era. Because what I'm trying to convey is part of an initiation is uncertainty. You don't know how it's going to come out. And because if you do know how it's going to come out, it will not have an initiatory transformational effect. You can't have a pretend near-death experience. You really got to feel it's on the line for the profound psycho-spiritual and moral transformation to take place. And but in the long run, I think out of this uncertainty, there could easily constellate a new coherence that is more integral. And I'm not attached to the word postmodern. There is a term metamodern that is being used now, but that is a very particular orientation, overlapping with what we've been discussing here, what we're moving towards, but it isn't. I want to convey, with whatever term we choose for this current era, its multivalence and that quality of indeterminacy and the quality of responsibility that puts on each of us to engage a worldview that can, because it's through the engagement with a worldview that it can be cultivated, evolved, and actually actualized. Whatever we pay attention to, that tends to develop, that tends to get magnified, and et cetera. So, but I take your point, and I think it's certainly one I can resonate with myself.
Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.
Should we go to Paul Groff?
Yes,
Thank you
please.
very much for yours.
Paul, do come in.
Well, we are out of time, and Eleanor, you still need to make some final comments. So I think I'm going to withdraw my question.
Oh no, Paul, please.
It was essentially about what Richard mentioned, the nature of the rippling effect and the implications for individual growth and spiritual. But let's leave it for other time. Let me just mention that I found Rick, I found your presentation brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Particularly the insight that the whole phenomenon of synchronicity is only a mystery because of our worldview. I think that was a brilliant. Okay, well, thank you.
Well, thank you, Paul. And honestly, if you could just say a couple sentences of what you were going to, because people have heard me already. They've well, we could hear your wisdom for 2 minutes, and we'd all be better off for it.
Okay. We are out of time.
No, time is plastic.
Please,
Come on.
Please, Paul, please.
What I was really wondering about the rippling effect, when people have, whether that's a question to both you, Rick, and Roderick, whether you've noticed often this rippling effect when people start experiencing some synchronicity, suddenly it starts coming to their life more and more often. And, to what extent it can be used for personal development, spiritual development. That's essentially the question.
That's really important. And I think, clearly Jung used synchronicity to better navigate his life, to be more conscious, more skillful, more aware of what he was blocking out through his unconsciousness, the narrow-minded one-sidedness of his conscious attitude, as he'd put it. So, and there is this tendency for synchronicities to be to converge at times of decision making and critical turning points, etc. Of course, it's the interpretation that is so important. And one thing we didn't focus on, but would in any longer treatment, is the fact there is a shadow side of synchronicities. One can project one's wishes onto and kind of spin the interpretation to serve a kind of egoic project. Sometimes Jung says that the victory of the triumph of the self requires a failure, of a defeat of the ego, and that's why, just as he used that stopped watch, not to say, "Damn, the watch is not working, and I've really got to get going here. End of the meeting." he used it to correct himself. That takes a certain psychological differentiation and willingness to. So a lot comes down to synchronicities can lend themselves to narcissistic inflation. Everything's centered on me. Wow, look at this is happening, etc. So it does take a capacity, a cultivated capacity for discernment. And we have to look at synchronicities as ultimately something that is not necessarily just given its meaning, but something that we bring something of ourselves to elicit what might be the wiser, deeper levels that are being conveyed.
Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Paul.
you, Paul.
Roderick, do you have any closing remarks that you would like to make?
Well, I mean, first of all, just to thank Rick so much for a really fantastic presentation and answers of the questions, and for giving us this sort of big picture of the context in which the discussion of synchronicity takes place, and also for a spirit, you know, of sort of both realism and optimism that comes through the way you presented your thoughts and the way you replied to the answers and the way you write as well. You know, there's because you look at the you know, the sort of very difficult things that are happening in the world and that can happen to individuals, but that are happening, you know, in global civilization in the current period, and you don't flinch, but you still find grounds for, you know, for talking positively and hopefully about what may emerge, you know, even though, as you say about initiations, we don't know what that might be. So I find that very inspiring and very helpful. So thank you for that, and thank you for the whole presentation. So yeah.
I just wanted to mention that the person who had his hand up that we didn't get to, if he would like to send you know, Eleanor or Roderick that question, I'd be happy to hear it and reply privately. I just want to Charles Card, that's who it
Thank
was.
you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Rick, so much for today. This has been an incredible start to our series. Thank you, Roderick, for being with us here today and for putting together this series. And thank you all for joining us today. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you, everybody, and bye-bye from the Party Center.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.